Your sessions are being recorded. The mics are muted. Each session will run 20 minutes, including our Q&As. You'll be able to unmute and use the video only during the Q&A portion. You'll use the chat for our questions. Refreshments, isn't this cute? Hopefully available in your kitchen, and we know your restrooms are nearby. You see the listening tip there. Holding something in your hand will hopefully keep you from multitasking. We want to also thank our NACDEP 2020 sponsors. And I will stop sharing my screen and allow our first speaker to get ready for hers. As we get ready to start our first speaker, I just want to introduce Kristen Grant. She is from the University of Maine. Her topic today is building the capacity of small coastal communities to estimate the value of their local marine economies. And we'll just give it about 30 seconds before we're ready to start. Looks like everybody's up, and I just want to let Penelope Whitman know if she's on. I will make sure to allow you to screen share. We'll make sure that happens.
I'm on, thanks.
You are on. Can you see your ability to screen share?
Yes.
Okay.
Yep.
Okay, sounds wonderful.
Okay.
With that, Kristen, if you'd like to get started.
Sure. All right, thanks everybody for joining us. Really glad to be on today. So like I got introduced, I'm Kristen Grant. I'm actually with Maine Sea Grant, University of Maine Cooperative Extension. I had a little joke about Kristen Grant with Maine Sea Grant, so I'm glad to be on today. And so the topic I'm going to be talking about is estimating the value of marine economies and helping to build local capacity around that. So I'm going to be talking about a story about a 7-year process that I've been on as a non-economist, trying to work between economists and communities to meet their local need for economic data in order to help inform local decision making on working waterfronts. All right, and to get us started, and probably with many people in NACDEP, the importance of economic data isn't something we need to dig into a lot, but let's think about this specifically from a small working waterfront standpoint, and maybe even take a step back further and talk about for a minute what a working waterfront actually is. For those of us with working in Sea Grant, a really commonly used term, but essentially it means the diverse businesses and activities that all depend on access to the water and shorefront infrastructure in order to flourish. It includes everything from, in my case, seafood harvesters and processors, to freight and fuel companies, to boat builders, ferries, cruise boat, kayak outfitters, marinas. So, but the really crucial point is that access to the water in order for the business and activity to actually take place. And for Maine in particular, those small working waterfronts are really the lifeblood of our 3,500-mile coastline. You can see in the picture here, this isn't what thankfully a lot of the Maine coast still looks like. And in that it's the lifeblood, the value is extremely important to these communities. So we'll talk for a minute about the American lobster, which is, obviously highly associated with Maine, and how from 2015 to 2017, lobster was the country's most single valuable marine harvested species, and 80% of which comes from Maine. And $640 million in total landings in 2018, with 76% of that coming from lobster. And so it really makes clear the dependence of, many of these small coastal communities on, the marine economy, and in particular, the lobster industry. And we'll look for a minute at Stonington, Maine in particular, which is Maine's top port. So if we go from United States to Maine to Stonington, you can see just how valuable the marine economy is to these local, small working waterfronts, and how disturbances such as COVID-19 can create in these local economies. So, as we just mentioned, enter COVID-19 and the result of closing restaurants, essentially, and which has fueled an economic downturn that's resulted in, what can be considered almost a seafood market crash. And in some places, some of these small working waterfronts in Maine, lobster sales are down by 50%. So major impacts in some of these really small communities, dangerously dependent upon this single industry and even a single species. So it clarifies the importance a bit. All right, so then we talk about the need and who needs this local level marine economy data. An accurate level of data is needed in order to inform local decision making. And we were just talking about Stonington, so here are more pictures of Stonington. And in their case, you can see in this insert picture here that sea level rise is particularly threatening to the pier that is such a central part of this coastal community's economy, and just how threatened by sea level rise it is. So the data that is needed at the local level is really actively used in order to inform just how much the infrastructure is supporting the economy, and what happens if it's lost to sea level rise. So now I'm talking about the need for this economic information to be available at the local level, and it has been available at other levels, actually. The NOAA's economists at the Office for Coastal Management have developed, it was probably a dozen years ago or so, the National Ocean Watch, or it's called now, Economics National Ocean Watch framework, which has made economic marine economy data available at the national, state, and county levels, but not at the local level. And especially in states like Maine, where home rule is the way that most of the decision making gets done, county level data really didn't provide the information that was needed in order to inform decision making. So this prompted a partnership between Maine Sea Grant and economists at the Office for Coastal Management in order to try to identify how to fill this gap, the need for local level marine economy data. All right, and then so I've been talking a lot about local here, and so what we did was try to develop a method that took the eNow framework that, as I just said, and I've got a link to it here, that provided data at the national, state, and county level, and could bring it down to this local level. So I've also got a link here for the information that's available on the web for this method that we've been developing. And the key to this new method is bringing in zip code business pattern data, as well as Atlantic Coastal Cooperative Statistics Program data, or ACCSP data, and combining that with the local knowledge in the communities. So in our cases, these are some examples here of some of the community level folks that we've worked with in the process of actually developing this local level model. Got the Washington County Council of Governments and the Maine Center for Coastal Fisheries, who are particularly important in the process of developing the method and then in field testing it to make sure it actually met needs in Maine. Now, talk for a minute about case study here. So I had just talked about the Washington County Council of Governments, and they were actually among the first of our stakeholders in Maine to apply the method. And the results that they found really make clear the need for combining this national level eNow framework with these other forms of data in order to make local level economic information available. So we'll look at some of that data here for just a second. My one and only figure. And so you can see in this, this figure that we've got in front of us now that the blue, which is just slightly visible on the graph on the left, and almost invisible in the graph on the right, it is the amount of economic value that was calculated using the eNow data alone. But then the orange shows us the amount that was calculated by adding that Atlantic Coast statistical program data. So how critical it is to add these other forms of data in order to provide that local level of economic information. And you can see that it roughly estimated the eNow framework. It managed to estimate only about 5% of the marine transportation and living resources contributions to the local marine economy. And had just the national level data been applied, the contributions would have been really vastly underestimated, and the value of this pier in Millbridge, Maine to the whole region would have been entirely miscalculated. So it really can provide critical data at the local level. All right, so what we're trying to do now is recognize that while the need for this data is so crucial to these working in local, small working waterfronts, the ability for local level officials and resource people to apply the method that we've developed within a single community it's just outstrips their capacity. So we've been really looking at how to bridge the gap between the resources that are available and the people that need those resources. So, so what we're doing is trying to develop a network of different levels of support. So there's essentially been a new method developed from our local level method, so that there will be an online platform that will enable the entry of just specific zip codes that communities are interested in looking at and delivering data. So the method has been made much more simple. However, it's really the partnerships that make the application of the data possible. So what we're looking to do is make those local decision makers, who you can see at the, the center of our figure here, and support them with regional planning and economic councils, as well as nonprofits, cooperative extension, Sea Grant, folks that are already doing work with communities that may or may not include economics, but people that are already well connected at the community level, to bring them together to support those local level decision makers, and then to provide that link out to economists that we have at the University of Maine, and then further out to national level economists at NOAA. So the hope is that with this, developing this network, that we can fill that gap, where right now we have the need for local level decisions to be made using this marine data, but need more capacity in order to be able to ask the right questions, to clarify what additional data needs to be collected, and to link with the right people in the community to in order to answer some of those questions, and then to bring those folks in touch with economists. So we're in the process right now of conducting webinars and meetings and interviews with community and economic development professionals across the state in order to work with them to identify how best to develop this network in order to create a system that will work well for them in order to bridge this, this gap. So that's my story, and it continues to this day. And I'm very happy to, to talk with people for the next few minutes and to connect with people after if you have further questions. But thanks very much for this opportunity.
Thank you, Kristen. Now's an opportunity for question and answer period with anyone that, so feel free to open your mic and ask questions, and I'll should be checking the chat box. Stephen, you've got a question there?
Oh, I was just applauding.
You're just applauding, okay.
Trying to add that back into the virtual setting.
That's perfect. Thank you very much. Well, we're definitely a little bit ahead of schedule, but I'll give people some time to maybe formulate some questions if they have them.
This is Dawn Thomany, and I had one question. So when you're working with those economists at NOAA, give me just a little more insight into how they're connecting data they collect on community economies and what you can collect from your community stakeholders about changes in business patterns that you see. I kind of understood it, but maybe you presented earlier than I was getting what you were trying to do, how you overlay.
Sure. Actually, I can go back a few slides here, and you can see there's a link here. See here to eNow itself. So you can visit that site and see what this national level framework looks like. And this is the framework that really did not address the needs at the local level for this data at all. So it's a really super easy tool and very helpful if what you're looking to do is get economic information for your state or for your county. But for us in Maine, most of the decision making is at the local level. So what we did was start with that framework when we were working with the NOAA economists, and then basically I'm the community level person. I was able to bring, the folks to the table that could say, these are our needs. This is the additional data that we could bring to the conversation, and the NOAA economists were able to say, and we could bring these other national level pieces of data in, like the zip code business patterns and the ACCSP data. So that was really informed the process of developing this new method, which is called estimating the local marine economy. And if you go to this second link, there's a whole suite of resources there, including a training in the more fully expanded method that can be brought to your community. If you can get 25 people together, they'll do the training for you. There's also an online tutorial, there's case studies, so there's a whole set of resources. But because Maine has a statewide population of 1.3 million people, and the need for this data is the greatest in these these communities, like you noted with Stonington. There are 1,000 people that live there year round. They do not have the resource people or the time to apply this method. So the key to being able to make the link between the people who needed the data the most and the economists that had access to the data was to find those people in between. So that's what this network is trying to do. And at this point, I suspect that we'll probably be working more with economists at University of Maine than we will with the NOAA economists. Does that answer your question?
Yes, thanks very much.
Sure.
Kristen, good timing. We're within that 1 minute warning window to kind of close out the session. If there's any other questions, I don't know if sometimes if people have asked for links like those to be listed in the chat section, if you could do that for us, that would be wonderful.
I will.
Any other questions out there while we're closing out this session? Okay. What we'll do now is when we transition to our next speaker, I know I saw on one of the last calls, someone looked like was walking on their treadmill. So I thought, if you're not walking on your treadmill during this presentation, maybe we get up and give ourselves a little bit of time, because our next speaker, Will Cronin, will start at 4:15 Eastern time. So we've got a little bit of time to transition. So with that, I will let Will get set up.
Okay, I'm on it. Just give me a sec here.
Thanks, Kristen, for posting those. And Will, it looks like I'm seeing your screen, so that's looking good.
Okay, so 5 minutes then?
Yeah, we've got about 5 minutes before we get started.
Okay, great. Thanks.
You bet. Again, for those of you that might be jumping on, we'll be waiting exactly until about 4:15 to get started with our next speaker. So just so you know.
Thank you, Jennifer. I was like, what happened? Because I heard you say it sorta, but I was jumping on and a couple of people were having password problems and I thought, oh no, because I'm trying to do tech on everybody. So excellent, excellent.
You bet. We'll be getting started just shortly here. I saw you pop
I'm
on.
not losing my mind. You know, it is Monday. I mean,
You are not. You are not. At least, you know, I know Will's going to be getting ready to get started here in just a bit.
awesome. Great turnout. Thanks, Eric. 64 folks here. Excellent. Thank you guys so much for joining. Good stuff.
Perfect. And Will, I didn't know if you were going to be using your video when we start, but just wanted to make sure you knew that that was not on yet.
I certainly can turn it on if that's desirable.
Yeah, that'd be great.
Okay.
Again, for those of you that are just jumping into this chat space or into this program, we're going to be getting started in less than a minute. And our speaker for our second talk within this concurrent session is Will Cronin from Michigan State University. He's going to be speaking on community branding for tourism and economic development. So can't wait to hear this presentation as well. And it looks like just a little bit longer, we'll be right at I got to make sure I check my time zones at 4:15 here in just a bit. Okay, Will, it's all yours.
Okay, great. Well, thanks everybody for joining us today and for listening in on my session. I want to talk today about the countywide branding project, well, really branding and marketing project that Baraga County has been working on now for over a year, and why a rural, an extremely rural county in the Upper Peninsula of Michigan would be pursuing a branding project, and what we hope to achieve and why. Hopefully as a bit of a case study for our colleagues in very rural areas who might be able to take some guidance from it or some inspiration. So I'll start by, and this would be a great opportunity if you want to use the chat feature. I just have a couple of really quick questions, and the first one is, the definition of community branding is a little problematic. So we all know what that is, right? What do you think of, and if a few of you just felt like typing your first reaction in the chat, what does that image on screen there make you think of? So
we're seeing a lot, aren't we?
Yeah, computers, phones, Apple, money, innovation, right? So we all know that brand. That's universally sleek design, exactly. Apple versus PC, exactly. So that's corporate branding, right? And that's kind of the objective of it, right? We can look at that logo and we can think, oh man, you know, it doesn't just say Apple computer or Apple devices or software. It's selling innovation and design and things like that. And so that's the kind of branding we're familiar with, but it becomes a little more difficult when we have to brand something like this. you know, this is obviously a gorgeous beach in the Upper Peninsula of Michigan, but how do you take that experience and that reality that you're seeing there, which is not just a really pretty beach, but also all these people there that are visiting and spending money and making memories and creating a lifelong impression of a place? And how do you take that and turn it into something that you can share with the world and make enticing? And it's a little more complicated than we might think initially. So it's important to start with this question of community branding versus community marketing. So branding is going to be the enduring essence of a community. So, you know, its reputation and the thoughts, values, feelings, and expectations that form a compelling promise, enabling people to choose that community over another. In simple terms, it's what makes your community special. And that's really what we're going to be talking about in this session. Marketing is a little more specific. That would be the activities, institutions, and processes involved in creating, communicating, and delivering value in a manner that propels a community towards its goals. So that would be the strategy and tactics used to sell a community. And these two concepts are obviously very tightly intertwined, but they're a little bit distinct. And we are really, like I said, going to focus on the branding aspect right now. One key aspect as well of branding is identifying your target market. And I don't have a lot of time to go into this deeply today, but we can break out target markets in a lot of ways. Your geographic market, behavioral market, you know, lifestyle and psychographic market, and your demographic market. And if you're going to do a brand, you have to really analyze from all of these aspects of your target market. Who is actually coming to your community? Why are they coming to your community? What makes them want to be in your community? And what is it they're looking to gain by being in your community? So, and I should add as well that your target market, you know, especially in rural communities, I think there's a tendency to sit back and go, oh, we know exactly who our target market is. We know exactly what they want. We know exactly why they're coming here. And I think I would venture to state that most communities that think that maybe are making a bit of a mistake. And that's part of the reason why in a branding process, you need to look at your target market very, very critically, because sometimes your target market is not exactly what you thought it was. So to give you a little more background here, Baraga County. Now, as you can see, there's Michigan, the mitten there on the bottom, and the Upper Peninsula on the top. The Upper Peninsula is frequently thought of in national maps as either a part of Wisconsin or Canada, but we are very much Michigan. And I'm going to guess that most folks on the call right now don't know where Baraga County is. When I ask this question in the mitten, most people don't know where Baraga County is. There we are. And we have a lot of the same issues that rural counties, rural areas all over the United States have. We have an aging population. We have economic stagnation. Well, this slide actually needed to be updated because our unemployment is certainly much higher than 7% now, but that's the case for everybody. But we do also have a lack of infrastructure for conventional economic development. We don't have interstate highways. We have access to a couple of commercial airports, but they're obviously not very big. We do have Class 1 rail, but we just don't have a lot of the amenities that conventional economic developers are looking for. But that's not to say that we don't have assets, because we do. Outdoor recreation and tourism is very much emerging in the Upper Peninsula of Michigan as a growing part of our economy. And we are located in a very strategic location between Marquette, which is a quickly growing city in the UP, kind of the capital of the UP, and the Copper Country, where the Upper Peninsula of the Upper Peninsula, which is known for some of the best mountain biking in the United States. And we're kind of right between there. between those places, and we have lots and lots of assets that are kind of not really developed yet, or we're just starting to develop. We're also proximate to Munising, which is where Pictured Rocks National Lakeshore is. You might have heard of Pictured Rocks. It's really grown in popularity and national interest over the last few years. We, of course, have a low cost of living, and we have, you know, and I put the caveat in there, by UP standards, strong amenities. We've got pretty good broadband. We've got pretty good medical care. The schools are good. We've got access to higher education in Northern Michigan University and Michigan Tech, both within, you know, a 2-hour drive or less. So we have lots of assets. But the question is, how do we take those assets and mold them into something? And somebody posted, we have Lake Superior. Yeah, we totally do. And that's a key part of our brand that came out of it is, yeah, Lake Superior. We have these assets. So the question becomes, how do we draw travelers off of US 41 and convince them to stay a while? But more specifically, you know, why did we decide to do this? And economic development was the overriding goal. As I said, we don't have a lot of assets that would be conventional economic development friendly. So we wanted to find a way to sell Baraga County as a place to live, work, and do business. We wanted to really focus, as a lot of rural communities are, on entrepreneurship and being a place where you can start a business and you can work remotely. If you can choose where you live, you can come live here. You can have that quality of life asset. You can potentially send your kids to a couple of 4-year universities not that far away. You can go to Houghton or Marquette and get on an airplane and get to Chicago or Detroit pretty quickly, and then from thence anywhere. So we are a place where you can come and have quality of life, and you can still stay connected to the outside world if you can choose your place of work. And then, of course, tourism. Create a name for ourselves so that when people come to our area, they'll stop instead of just passing through. And this is something that other parts of Michigan, especially the Munising area, have done really well. The Upper Peninsula for a very long time, and I should back up and say the Upper Peninsula is about the size of, if I recall correctly, Maryland-ish, with 350,000 people. So there's a lot of room and not a lot of people up here. And the Upper Peninsula is not a known quantity to a lot of folks in downstate Michigan or in Chicago or in the Twin Cities or Wisconsin, which are kind of our primary markets for tourism. So we have seen some other parts of the UP, particularly Munising, do a really good job, and also Marquette, and the Keweenaw Peninsula, I should say, of doing a really good job of sort of creating a name for themselves that make people want to come up here and come visit them specifically. And so we want to do the same, or at least something like that. And one challenge we run into is we have people all the time say, well, we don't want to be Munising, or we don't want to be Marquette. So, well, we're not going to be Munising or Marquette, but we could still create a unified brand and marketing campaign that'll keep us competitive in the 21st century economy. And it's important to understand as well that this is an aspirational brand. We're not there yet, but it is something that we wanted to put down on paper and say, this is why we're doing this, and this is why we're working for it. And from an emerging standpoint, you know, with COVID-19 now, the data in tourism clearly shows right now that people perceive outdoor recreation as safer. They perceive outdoor recreation as a way to, you know, get your recreation, but also, you know, practice social distancing and be safe while you do it. And so it's expected, and in previous downturns, outdoor rec has been one of the first sectors to come back, and the hope is, or not, you know, that we would be in a position to take advantage of the upswing in tourism as people begin to get back to normal, whenever that happens, specifically in outdoor recreation. So we feel like this will help us be positioned to do that when the time is right for people to travel. We really intended to have a broad base of partners So from local government, our chamber, our CVB, extension, our regional planning, other local governments, our Keweenaw Bay Indian community friends, economic development, we have some private sector landowners and many other stakeholders. So our goal was to really maintain an open, transparent process because of course in small town community development, you have got to always be on the, you have to be proactive about being transparent and bringing people into the process to maintain that trust. So just a quick example of the timeline here. We started in May 2018, and we worked all through last year to get the brand document done. The branding document was finished at the end of 2019, and we started just this January on the go-to-market marketing strategy, which is not surprisingly on hold right now. And I want to talk briefly, because I know I'm running up on my time, why we in Baraga County elected to get professional help, because frequently this is the kind of project that communities will try to DIY, and we did not want to do that. It's important to understand that branding and marketing for communities especially are highly specialized skills, and that professional help would help us ensure that our process is complete and effective as it can be. So we went with Platypus Advertising and Design out of Pewaukee, Wisconsin. They've done this before. Their principal, we were very careful to choose a firm that got the Northwoods. Their principal has a home in northern Wisconsin, so that was good. And then, so we really wanted this to be somewhere, to be a firm that we could work with and understood our situation. So this is our brand profile, and our core brand promise is opportunity. This is probably not surprising, but it was discovered during the branding analysis, the analysis and research portion of the branding process, that, you know, we have tremendous outdoor recreation assets, but what we do not have are the businesses that go with them. So we don't have outfitters. We don't have, you know, a quote unquote, you know, good restaurant. We don't have a brew pub. We don't have a brewery. We don't have cool B&Bs or anything like that. So we are positioning ourselves as an opportunity-driven place where people who might want to start a business, you know, with low capital requirements, can do that. You know, it doesn't take that much money up front to start a guide service or a kayak rental on, as Gary mentioned in the chat, Lake Superior. And of course, we have a lot of protected water too. So Keweenaw Bay and Huron Bay are good places to learn how to get out on the water and get out on larger bodies of water and be safe doing it. So that's my time, 15 minutes. So I'd like to leave some time. I'll just talk about next steps really quick. We have a community action group. We're starting to do some implementation of report recommendations around community cleanup and generating excitement in the county. Continuing to do fundraising and marketing, as I said, is underway, but it's on hold right now due to COVID. So we will continue to report back, and perhaps at NACDEP 21, hopefully in person, I can tell you about phase 2 and the marketing aspect. So I know that's my time, so I will go ahead and ask for, there's my contact info, and ask if there are any questions.
Thank you, Will. We'll see if we've got some questions coming up here. I know I've got one if we don't see any from the group. I'll throw mine out there, Will. When you're working with a county, is it difficult to kind of get that county branding, since you have so many small, you know, towns and other groups, you know, kind of getting that cohesiveness around an entire county plan?
Yeah, exactly. And that's something that that we, you know, it's not ready for prime time yet, but I'll mention that the brand that comes out of this is very likely going to be focused on Keweenaw Bay, because Baraga County, the northern half of Baraga County, is sort of bisected by this large bay called Keweenaw Bay of Lake Superior. So it's probably going to be the Keweenaw Bay region. It's probably not going to be the county, because we wanted to, you know, first off, we want to be inclusive and not, because there is a village of Baraga, for example. So we don't want to create that confusion. And also, you know, it's a lot easier to get people who have no idea where you are excited about Keweenaw than about Baraga County. So, but we've really been proactive about working with all of our local units and our community stakeholders to help them understand why this is important and that this is going to be something that benefits everybody, and that really, you know, that the name isn't going to, if we brand ourselves as Keweenaw, it's not going to totally undermine the operations of the Baraga County Chamber of Commerce or the Baraga County CVB or whatever. That this is going to be something that everybody's going to have access to and can use to drive their own missions. And so far, we've been pretty successful about that. If there's one takeaway with this, it's just get way out in front of it and be as transparent and upfront as possible about why you want to do something like this and why it's important. And we've had great leadership from the county too.
Will, we've got a couple other questions. Catherine asked, how did the funding for the marketing work?
So the funding for phase one, the branding part, was pretty much all raised, not quite all, but almost all from local governments. So the county, the townships, the villages. We actually don't have a city in Baraga County. We have 2 villages and I think 7 townships. So we raised money from the county and those units. We did also get funds from some of our big landowners, our big corporate landowners. So Weyerhaeuser, which is now sold off to Lime, another timber company, funded us. Eagle Mine provided some funding. So we got some private sector dollars, we got some public sector dollars. Yes.
Well, it looks like we're getting down to that last minute. You've got a couple other questions. I just wanted to
Sure.
at least recognize those. One asked, how do you plan to roll out or unveil the brand? And then the second one asked, if you had to start this process over, what would you have done differently?
Sure.
So just want to, in the last minute, maybe see if you could touch on those.
Yep, I can do that. So the rollout part, we've obviously shared the brand itself with the public, but we've intentionally been, you know, we haven't gone wide with it yet, because the thing about the branding document is it really is just a book. When the marketing materials start to come in, that's the eye candy aspect, and that's when people are really going to start to get excited. So, you know, I think when we have some really cool graphics and word art to show, that's when the really huge push to say, hey, this is here and this is something to get excited about will be done. But it is public knowledge now. We have a lot of really good community buy-in and stakeholders. So we're not being covert with it, but we will wait for the fun stuff before we really go wide with it. And then if we had to start over and what would we have done differently? I think probably, you know, we did a bunch of work explaining what branding is and why it's important, especially in rural communities. I think we would have done more, because this is kind of when people hear branding, they think Coke, they think Apple, they think, you know, GM or whatever. So I think as much education as we did, we would have done more, and really tried to bring more people into the process sooner, with a good understanding of what it is we were trying to achieve. And like I said, we did it, but we could have done more.
That's great, Will. Well, thank you so much. This is about the end of our time with your session, Will, so I appreciate all the questions in the chat box. We will give our next speakers just a few minutes to kind of get their PowerPoints up. So if you could stop sharing your screen, and we'll allow our next 2 speakers to get ready.
Thank you, everybody.
Thanks, Will. I see some applause out there. So from Gary, starting to recognize what those look like on this screen.
Jennifer, I'm trying to share my screen and it keeps saying host disabled participant screen sharing.
Okay, I'll fix that for you.
Great.
Stephen, are you able to jump on there now?
Yep, looks like it's working.
Perfect.
so this.
Brian, I know you like hearing that.
Thank you.
bet.
I'm
You
on
bet.
another Zoom too, so I'm kind of watching both. Just making sure the tech's going well, but I am enjoying the presentation, so thank you guys so much.
Wonderful. And Penelope, are you able to see the screen share button on yours? If not, I'll make sure we do that.
I am, thanks. But Stephen has our presentation. We'll
Okay.
just- yeah.
Using the same slide set. Okay,
Yeah.
wonderful. Well, we'll get started in about 2 minutes. So for those of you that needed to get up for a little bit, we'll get started in 2 minutes.
I'm really excited for this this session, this memory mapping idea. I want to learn about it because I don't know about it. But I've done something maybe similar with my online classes of talking with students the last couple months, having them remember, you know, parts of campus, and in fact with my daughters and their college campus. I think it's good. It's connecting. So anyway, I'm excited to thank you guys so much for doing this.
Oh, awesome. We're excited to, you know, have you see what you think of it, I guess. Yeah.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you. The pressure is on.
I know.
There's
of
no
this
pressure. I'm a learner. I just want to soak up and get ideas. So, and for development and tourism and all. I mean, it all works. You know, I love it.
Yeah. It's
That's
cool.
We're getting real close about it. I'm showing about a minute or a little less than a minute, so we'll get started here in just a bit for those that are joining us. Okay, our speakers that will begin at 4:40 are Stephen Menno from the University of New Hampshire and Penelope Whitman, also from the University of New Hampshire. And the topic is memory mapping as a community destination development tool. And I'll let you guys take it over. Stephen, I don't know if I got your last name right.
Oh, it's okay. It's Mino, but
Mino.
No one knows how to mispronounce it.
I was toggling between the two, so I wasn't sure. I was going to text you. Okay, good deal.
Another example of how Ellis Island wronged my ancestors.
Wonderful.
But anyways, thank you everyone for for the last session of the day. So sorry we couldn't have you in person in Portsmouth, New Hampshire, but I'm Stephen Mino with University of New Hampshire's Cooperative Extension, and my colleagues Penelope Whitman, and we're here to talk about memory mapping as a destination development tool. So what we're really talking about here is how people, let's see, is this slide going to advance for me? There we go. So what we're really here talking about is places, and to give you a little bit of background of how we kind of came to develop this tool, I'm a land use planner by trade who has a background in anthropology, and Penny has a tourism background. Penelope has a tourism background. So we got onto this topic that we became really fascinated by, which is how people respond and interact with their environments. And there's a really heavy biological and anthropological component of this, that kind of how our brains emerge to survive basically out in the wilderness. And it's really interesting to see how this is translated to when we create our environments. And the quote that I always resonate with is this one that, if I can, move everyone's screens. As a person lives life, one's narrative begins to etch meanings on a particular space, causing it to become a place. So really what we try to emphasize is that we have this two-way relationship with our environments, that not only do we put meaning onto it, but it also helps inform our own meanings. And what is interesting about that is a lot of that comes from sort of what I like to call our lizard brains, kind of when we were ancient man, thinking about how we were going to survive. And that's really how we have interpreted a lot of our meanings. And that has informed whether we like or dislike spaces. So if anyone else here has a planning background, I'm sure you've encountered the image of the city, which was created by an urban theorist named Kevin Lynch back in the 1960s. And he really took this concept home, where he wanted to focus on our emotional responses to space. And what he found is that we as people are constantly making decisions, not even realizing that we're making it, whether we have to go left, right, forward, what's that sound, what's that smell? And this is, just part of our instincts for kind of being in the world. And he found that the ease at which we could make these constant decisions kind of reflected how well we like or dislike a space. And he kind of pulled this all together to create this concept of imageability. How well in our minds can we remember and sort of envision these spaces? Because what he found was that the easier it was to make these constant decisions, the more likely we are to return to these spaces and envision them in our own minds. So, and he found that the sharper the image, the more likely we are to want to return to this space. Hence sort of this nexus of destination development. So he found that we created these images along these 5 key elements. And I'm going to kind of just rush through these just for the sake of time. But basically what they are paths, edges, districts, nodes, and landmarks. And so, a path you conceive of as, it could be a sidewalk, it could be a street, it could be a bike lane, it could be a trail. It really depends on who the user is and how they imagine it. And I guess I should also clarify, it's these 5 elements that come together to help form this image in our memories and that help us map out these spaces. So, and let's see, I'll just kind of quickly go ahead just for the sake of time. But what is also important to consider about paths as an important element is that we have to design paths not only for the user, but for how people travel and are likely to travel throughout their environment. So I always like this photo on the left, where the city obviously spent a lot of money building this sidewalk, but people aren't using it. They're going straight through the lawn and, kind of creating their own path. And then sort of on the flip side, this other town in the image on the right, they must have had cyclists going through on this sidewalk here, and they didn't want them to, so they put up these barriers, but the cyclists still went around the barriers to kind of go where they wanted to go and where they felt comfortable. So it's really important that we create paths that people are going to use and that address all users. The second element is this concept called edges. So when we think of places in our minds, they must be demarcated somehow. They need to have a boundary. One of the anxieties a lot of people have when it comes to, I always find this interesting, outer space, is the boundlessness of it, that it just goes on forever. And so it's really important that we have these kind of tight edges, demarcated areas when we're thinking about places. And an edge can be something as large as, a river that goes through a town, such as the image on the right, all the way down to a fence or a tree line, such as this image on the left. And so it's really important to note that scale for using these tools can, go as small as a street, up to a neighborhood, a town, all the way up to a region, as we'll talk about later. And so the third element is a district. And so we can think of districts as plazas. We can think of them as sort of a historic district, like in quintessential New England, which is the center photo. It could be a downtown, or it could be a housing development in suburbia. But it's just some area that we define by a common characteristic. The fourth element of how we conceive of spaces is a node, and that's really a strategic focus point for people to meet and to gather. So some examples of nodes are on the left, we have an old historic New England meeting house that got turned into a bar. They're a little bit out of focus, but it's just a place where people are gathering, conversing, having a good time. The top one is actually from last year's NACDEP, which was the Lake Lure Flowering Bridge, where they built all these garden spaces on a decommissioned bridge in North Carolina, where a bunch of gardening communities focused, and it became a real hotspot for people to meet, to hang out. And then the last node is this photo on the bottom, which is the nexus of a bunch of different transportation modes. So we have a bike share here next to a parking lot, next to a sidewalk, next to a public park, where all these different types of people and users are congregating. But it's really important that people feel safe to gather here, to meet, and it's very distinct. And then the last element are landmarks. So landmark is just some external point of orientation, and is usually easily identifiable in the landscape. And it could range from anything from this mountain out here in the Hudson Valley, to a statue in Savannah, to the bottom photo is the City Hall in Claremont, New Hampshire. That's the tallest building in the downtown. And you can really see from any angle that you are in the downtown to really help orient yourself. So what we do when we meet with communities and we use this tool is we go through over the theory and the concept at a much slower pace than what I just did with all of you. And then we help them practice it, kind of taking that theory and applying to reality on a space that they're familiar with, but not the one that we want them to work on in that session. So a typical one is, this is Concord, New Hampshire, which is our state capital. And what we try to get them identify is what are the different elements they see in this image. We also like to use Concord because it has really sharp, high imageability. We get them to try to understand the river that's as an edge that separates the city from the country, that you can sort of see at the top of the screen. There's a highway that runs through, I'm not sure if you can see my mouse, that is also another really important edge that separates the downtown area from the river. And we get them to try to understand, you know, the state capitol here, this sort of focal building in the center of the downtown as a really important landmark. And so then the fun part comes in that Penelope will talk about more in depth, which is we then get them to draw these maps of whatever space that they want to work on, and we create a legend for them to use. In this case, we use dash red lines for path, solid blue lines for edges, landmarks are pink stars, nodes are green circles, and districts are sort of this hash yellow area. You can use whatever symbology you want, but the important thing to convey is you do not want people drawing these memory maps that are an exact, you know, brick by brick replica of what the space is. You really want them to convey how they think and remember the space using just these 5 elements. So I'm going to turn it over to Penelope, who's going to talk more about the examples of us using this with communities.
There we go. Thank you, Stephen. So I'm Penelope Whitman, and I'm going to tell you how we use this tool with the Chamber of Commerce. The Chamber of Commerce in Lake Sunapee, which is a beautiful lake here in central New Hampshire, asked us to do an activity for their board retreat. And this is a region that attracts a lot of visitors, but there is no formal visitor organization. There's no DMO here. There is no tourism planning. It's all a bit haphazard. And this chamber is responsible for 14 different municipalities. And they were coming together and thinking, how can we brand ourselves? This is what every community, every region wants to do, is brand themselves. But it's challenging, as Will was referring to. You know, people want to say, oh, we have this, we have that, we have all of these different amenities. But to bring something together, you really have to understand how people are going to move through a space and the experiences they're going to find in those spaces. So we wanted the participants to consider how they experience their region. And to do this, we asked them to make memory maps of their region. So next slide, please, Stephen. The thing that we wanted them to understand was coming to a place, you are providing the backdrop for an experience. You know, who creates an experience? We can't create the entire experience for our visitors. So we have to create the backdrop for it, but there are all these other elements that affect that experience. They could be the ease at which the people find the parking, or where the bathrooms are, or if there's a welcome sign, if the restaurants are friendly, you know, just very small details that add to this overall experience. And from those experiences, a person creates a meaning. This is my favorite place. I want to move here. I belong here. I do not belong here. I'm uncomfortable here. I can't figure this place out. You know, these are the kinds of meanings that people make depending on these little things like, I'm lost. I can't figure out where I'm supposed to put the car. You know, these kinds of basic movements through space. Next slide, Stephen. This is an example of a memory map that I made for New London, New Hampshire, which is near where I live. And this was the example that we showed our group so they would understand what they were about to do. We want to tell people this is not art. You know, you don't have, it doesn't have to be look like a map. It's your sense of how you use a space. So you can see that there are a lot of green circles, and those are nodes. And those are places like the yoga studio that I go to, or the coffee place, the library, restaurants that I like, all the places that I find that I connect with this community. And then the dotted lines are paths, how I move through this community, how I discover more places within the community because of hiking trails that are down this way. And then solid blue lines, it's hard to see, but this was kind of the boundary that I saw. I didn't really know what was behind here, but nothing was drawing me back this way. Next slide, please. So we gave everybody a set of colored pencils and a sheet of 11 by 14 paper and asked them to get to work to draw whatever part of the region that they were considering was their region, how they moved through the broader region. It could be just a couple of communities, it could be all of them, how they conceived of the region. And they really got into it. We gave them about half an hour and they were quietly working away. And then we asked them, next slide, please, Stephen, to share, sorry about the shadows here, what they discovered. We first asked them to go around and talk about what landmarks had they noticed. And then what were, as they went through sharing their maps, and they were all so excited, wanting to look at each other's and say, I put down this, what did you put down? They also noticed some challenges for the region. So it's sort of a different way of getting at what are our things that we need to work on, like lack of walkability, that the highway that runs through the region on the north is really an edge and is sort of a limiting factor. They talked about how one town is really visible because it has a big sign off the highway and people know to get off and they can see actually the shops from the highway. So began to think about how people would know where to go. And then they got into opportunities as they were realizing that the things they thought were landmarks and nodes were things that other people thought of different ways. They got to the question, which I thought was so exciting, which was, if we have these emotional connections with these places that we've built up over years of living here, how can we create the opportunity for visitors to have an emotional connection with these places? How can we make it easy for them to find these special places that are so obvious to us? One addendum to this process is thinking about how we're moving through spaces differently in this pandemic time. So the map on the left is my map from the before times. And the map on the right is how how I find I'm moving through New London during the pandemic, during this stay-at-home time. And the blue lines are these edges that I'm not going beyond. And finding that our spaces have really shrunk. The nodes, all these social places on the left that I was using and interacting with community members, there's only a couple now. The key one is the liquor store, the food co-op, the drugstore, not going on the community hiking trails anymore. So it's interesting to realize that these elements are not fixed, they change over time, and they're important to identify when you're thinking about how people use spaces and how you want them to use spaces. Next slide. So what do you need? You need to get this book. You need to understand Kevin Lynch's approach to spaces. And Stephen, was there one more slide of?
I think it was accidentally hidden, Penny, but.
Oh dear, okay. So folks, what you need to run a workshop is you need to provide everybody with 5 colored pencils of different colors that are all the same. 11 by 14 paper, you need your flip charts that we always have, and we found 90 minutes to do this exercise.
Penny, or Penelope, that's wonderful. We're getting within that last minute of the time period, so just wanted to give you that warning.
Thank you. Does anybody have any questions for either of us?
We're seeing a lot of people say, thanks for sharing. Could you put the book title back up? There we go.
To somebody's comment about new resident attraction, Penelope and I have also talked, this tool could be used in a lot of different ways. We've used it for destination development, but yeah, absolutely, new resident attraction. We think it could be a really interesting component to the First Impressions program. It could, also really help towns identify or amend their zoning maps. There's a lot of different applications for this that are really exciting.
One of the questions I see, Nadine, everybody, thank you so much for your nice comments, asking how do you see this being used in a small rural county to pull communities together? I think it's a great question. It's very similar to the region that we're working in, these disparate villages that are trying to consider themselves as a region. I think the first thing is to get them together and think about how they move through the broader region. What are the linking points for their own selves before they can begin to sell that as a broader region? I think it's really key. I think this is something that communities always start with the branding, and it's so important to back up and start with the planning.
Penelope and Stephen, I think we're at the end of our session, so I just want to conclude. I don't know if I stepped on somebody who's getting ready to say any more.
Nope, you're fine.
Yeah.
Okay. Okay, wonderful. Well, again, thank you to all of our speakers. Kristen Grant from the University of Maine, Will Cronin from Michigan State, and the two of you, Stephen Mino and Penelope Whitman. I appreciate all of your help on this session and doing such a great job for us